Oh, the ACT reading section. Have you ever experienced the panic of getting to the last passage just to realize that you only have a couple of minutes to work through it? Or you get to a question, read the answer choices, and realize they all kind of sound like they could be correct. If so, stick around because today we're going to talk about the top 5 mistakes that I've seen my students make on the ACT reading section. Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Megan. I am your test prep guru and expert of all things ACT, SAT, and college admissions related. Today we're going to continue our series on the top mistakes that I've seen my students make on the ACT over my 10 years of tutoring standardized tests. We've already done the English and the math sections, so if you haven't seen those, check out the links for those in the description. Today, we're going to be covering the reading section, which is actually the section that I have majority of my students ask me about. And this is mainly because the timing is so tight on the reading section. You only have 35 minutes to complete 40 questions in 4 passages. Even though none of the mistakes that we're going to discuss today directly talk about the timing, all of them will definitely help if timing is your issue. So let's get to it. Mistake number 1, not reading the vocabulary words in context. Talk to anybody about a standardized test and they will tell you you have to study vocabulary lists. This is because in past years, the ACT and SAT have been known for having really difficult vocabulary sections. In the last couple of years, however, they've actually gotten rid of all of those sections and instead have replaced them with words that are at or even below your reading level. So instead of using words that are really hard and arcane, they will use words that you're familiar with. The way that they'll make them more difficult, however, is that they will use multiple definitions for that word in the answer choices. Let's look at a quick example of this. So let's look at number 37 to show how you have to read vocabulary words in context. So this question reads, as it is used in line 45, the word read most nearly means to. Right off the bat, we're noticing that the word read is super simple. It is not high school reading level. Heck, it's not even middle school reading level. This is an elementary, like primary reading level. So it's really important that we reread this in context to figure out which definition from the answer choices is going to be the correct one. Because when we start to look at them, they all could work in some way, shape, or form. Looking at A, learn from print. Well, that's literally what it means to read, that you read something and then you learn from print. B, observe. You could say that you're reading someone and observing their behaviors in order to understand what's going on. C, think about. If you read, you think about things. And then finally, D, predict. That if you are reading to understand, or maybe you're reading somebody's future, so those can all mean predict. So they're all different definitions of reads. We need to read them in context to figure out exactly which one it is. So here's the sentence in context. Scientists determine an eel's age using a microscope to read the growth rings of its otolith, a small hard calcium deposit at the base of its skull. Right off the bat, they're not talking about reading in terms of print because they're literally looking at something from an eel's skull. Second of all, they're not predicting things. They're trying to find information, not predicting the future. So we can get rid of that answer choice too. And lastly, it doesn't really make sense that they're thinking about the growth rings of the otolith because while they may be thinking about it, that's not the main purpose of the read here. The main purpose is that they're looking at it. They're observing it. Going back to the question, we can cross off learn to print, think about, and predict, and we know that observe is the only answer choice that makes sense for a read in this case. So the moral of the story here is to read your vocabulary words in context in the passage every single time. Mistake number 2, reading straight through the paired passages. On the ACT, you may get a set of paired passages. This is when you get 2 shorter passages instead of 1 longer one. You won't actually know if you'll get a paired passage until you show up on exam day because they don't guarantee them on every single test. So when you start the reading section, make sure that you do a quick flip through just to see if you actually get a paired passage or not. Now, with everything, you have to make sure that you have a good strategy for these paired passages. And that's because they each have their own main ideas. They're going to be connected in some way, shape, or form. That's why they're paired together. However, if you read straight through, it's really easy to muddy up those details and get things mixed up. So here's the basic strategy whenever you're given a paired passage. Step 1 is to read passage A and then immediately answer any questions for passage A. Then read passage B and answer any questions for passage B. Before moving on to the questions about both passages, make sure that you ask yourself these 2 questions. Why are these passages together and how are they different? This is an important step to make sure that you've established the main ideas for each passage separately so that you can understand how they're going to be coming together in those final compare and contrast questions. Finally, you can actually move on to those compare and contrast questions. The great thing is that there's usually one question that will ask why are they together or how are they different, so you've already prepared yourself for that last section. So the moral of the story here is to keep the passages separate as long as you possibly can, and then bring them together once you have a good idea of what the connection is. Mistake number 3, reading straight through the entire passage word for word. This is the hardest hurdle that majority of my students have to deal with. And that's because in school, you're taught to read texts closely in order to make sure that you fully understand what the author is trying to tell you. And then to analyze the passage, to understand, well, what is the author trying to tell you by reading between the lines? However, neither one of these strategies are very helpful on the reading test. 1, because it's timed, and 2, because the questions are going to be pretty direct. If they give you an analysis question at all, it's going to only be half a step past just basic reading comprehension. So let's think about the numbers for this reading section. First, you have 35 minutes for 40 questions across 4 passages. That's 10 questions per passage. So on average, you have about 8 to 8.5 minutes for each passage. If you give yourself 30 seconds per question, then that gives you only about 2 to 2.5 minutes to read the passage and understand it well enough so that you can move on to the questions. And then quickly go back and find information to get the answer of the question. The easiest way to deal with timing is to make sure that you have a good, solid reading strategy so that you don't have to read through every single word in the passage itself. A couple of recommendations would be read the beginning and end of each paragraph and figure out how you can summarize that paragraph in a couple of words. Another thing is that you can start with the questions. A lot of my students like to start with the questions because they like to have a good idea of what is going to be asked of them later on so that when they're reading through the passage, they know where to focus their attention. So the best thing that you can do is to come up with a good, solid strategy early on in your test prep. This way, you're not going to get yourself into a situation where you're just building on bad habits. Also, you actually have time throughout your entire prep work in order to get better and better and better at that strategy. As with everything that we do in life, if you're starting a new task or a new skill, you're not going to be great at it at first, and you're definitely not going to be fast at it. But the more time that you give yourself to practice it, then the better your timing will get. Last thing with this mistake, I'm going to be having videos in the future talking about the different reading styles that you can use for different parts of the passage to help with your timing, as well as going into a little bit more in depth with what strategies you can use for these sections. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure that you do so that you can check those out as soon as they become available. Mistake number 4, ignoring the introductory information at the beginning of every single passage. At the beginning of every passage on the test, you'll see a short little section that's in smaller font right after the subject that passage is. This is called the introductory information, and it is golden information. In it, you will have the title of the passage, the author of the passage, when this passage was published. You will also have information about if it's part of a bigger collection of works. They might even include some background knowledge about characters or people in the passage. Maybe they'll give you some definitions. It can only be helpful. So if you're going to read something word for word in the passage, that would be the information to read. So let's take a look at a quick example of this. This is a typical example of an introductory information section from a passage. So right away, it talks about social science. That's the passage type that it is. Then it reads, this passage is adapted from the article Green Music in the Rainforest by Suzanne Charlet, which appeared in the fall 2002 Ford Foundation report. OELA is an acronym based on Portuguese words rather than the English words used in this article. And then a luthier is a maker of stringed musical instruments. Right away, we have a lot of information. First and foremost, we have the title of the passage. We have Green Music in the Rainforest. We also have the author, Susan Charlet, and we also know when it was published in fall of 2002 at the Ford Foundation report. So when they're talking about green music in the forest and the rainforest, now we have a pretty good idea about what this is talking about. We're talking about maybe plants that are making music, maybe animals that are making music, maybe these are people or different sounds that these different plants and animals are making. Also, it could be people who live close to or in these forests, in these rainforests, who are making music or live very close to the rainforest. But the point is that we already have an idea in our minds about what's going to happen in this passage. We always have those predictions. Second thing that we're given is a couple of useful pieces of information in the second part of that introductory section. First is that they're telling us what the OELA is. We can predict that it's probably going to be given to us pretty early on in the passage, which it is. It's in the very first sentence. The Amazonian Workshop School for Fabrication of Stringed Instruments, OELA, is a small part of a larger effort to create sustainable harvest of the great Amazon forest and to give employees to the region's burgeoning population. So right away we know that it's about people who are going to be musicians around the Amazon forest, and they also explain why those letters in the acronym don't match up with the title, because the title in Amazon is going to be in Portuguese. And they also tell us what a luthier is, that it's a maker of stringed musical instruments. So that way, when we get to that section in the passage, we don't have to think about what that means. Sometimes they're not going to give you just a definition. Other times they maybe give you background information about an important historical figure. I've seen passages where they give some background information about different philosophers, different psychologists, different researchers. So you always want to make sure that you are reading this word for word and use that information in the back of your head as you're reading through the entire passage. So moral of the story, always read the introductory information. Mistake number 5, skimming over the definitions of words in the answer choices, especially with main idea questions. Read any main idea question, and typically all of the answer choices will start with an action word or a verb. Make sure that you pay close attention to what these action words are. That's because the test makers are very precise and very careful about the words that they use in each of these answer choices. So make sure that you trust them. This is especially important in main idea questions like the one we're going to see in this next example. Number 21 is a perfect example of a main idea question where you should pay close attention to the action words at the very beginning of each of the answer choices. The question reads, the passage is best described as being told from the point of view of a philosopher who is, and then at the very beginning of each answer choice, it talks about discussing, presenting, reflecting, and advising. These 4 words are all similar in the sense that they kind of come from the same meaning family. Discussing, presenting, reflecting, advising. We can think about teachers, professors, parents, people who mentor. Are people who would do these types of things. But when you actually get into the different words, there's a very stark difference. Discussing is just that, having a discussion. Presenting is when you're actually presenting to other people, trying to teach and let other people know about what you know. Reflecting is when you're looking back on your own experiences. And then advising is when you're giving advice or when you're mentoring someone. It's really important to immediately know those differences between those 4 words because that's going to help you with your process of elimination as you go through the rest of the sentence. And you don't even have to read through the rest of the answer choices just yet. This is a main idea question, so we're not going to go through the entire passage. But when you're working through these main idea questions, you should have a pretty good idea. Is it more reflecting? Is it interacting with other people? Is it more teaching? Are you having a conversation? For example, discussing, presenting, and advising usually have somebody else involved, whereas reflecting can be isolated. Likewise, if you're presenting or advising, you're kind of in a leadership position. For main idea questions, always start off by reading through and focusing on those action words. So moral of the story, when you're looking at the answer choices, pay especially close attention to any verbs, especially in the main idea questions. And a little bonus, I've actually compiled a list of the most common words used in the main idea questions. Check out the description below where I have a link for that on my website. So there you have it, the top 5 mistakes that I've seen my students make on the ACT reading section. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Also, if you have any questions about anything reading section, or if you have any topics that you want me to cover in future videos, let me know in the messages below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!